Podcast number 1. The People of Guyana. The original people of Guyana and the Caribbean, the Amerindians, are the direct descendants of nomadic tribes who came to this region from Siberia, perhaps as far back as 20,000 years ago. These nomads migrated slowly through North America and into Central and South America, and by the 1400s, these first Guyanese were divided into two main groups, the Caribs who inhabited the coastlands and the Arawaks who were mostly found in the interior. It is from these indigenous peoples that we get the word Guyana, which according to historians was a word first used to describe the region covering modern Guyana as well as Suriname and French Guyana. Hi there, and welcome to Forgotten Stories with Aaron Darcy. I am your host Aaron Darcy. Thanks for joining me on this journey through time as we revisit events that shaped the history of Guyana and the Caribbean. On this series of talks we will explore and share the history and culture of my country, Guyana, and of the greater English-speaking Caribbean to which we are historically connected. We'll look at the places, people, music and everything else that makes us Guyanese and Caribbean. In the distant past, many different people came and stayed in Guyana and in our Caribbean islands, hence the diverse cultures that have blended so well to make us into Guyanese and West Indians. The Europeans came and set up trading and military posts here in the late 15th century, and subsequently Africans and indentured servants from India were brought to Guyana and the Caribbean. Portuguese and Chinese people came too, and we all eventually became Guyanese and West Indian citizens. I see it happening again in Guyana because these days people from all over are once again coming here. Haitians are coming. Venezuelans are coming, Brazilians, Chinese, Middle Eastern and African businessmen too, all are heading to Guyana. And why? It's probably due to the recent discovery of vast oil reserves in Guyana's economic zone, which has brought the country into focus on the international scene and also rekindled some rather unwelcome attention. I refer to Venezuela's long-standing claim to the entire Essequibo region. Guyana, of course, has declared its intention to await a final resolution on this issue from the ICJ and attended a CARICOM brokered meeting with Venezuela, but the latter has always displayed a disregard for international laws. That administration, it seems, prefer instead to rattle its sabers in memory of some long-forgotten halcyon days of glory. Now that should put into a nutshell what is being discussed across some media circles as a brewing war between Guyana and Venezuela, and while this is not necessarily the case, it should be a matter of concern to all Guyanese and Caribbean people. It was quite interesting to witness the CARICOM brokered meeting and its conclusion, especially after the weeks of threatening rhetoric from Maduro, and don't get me wrong, I was relieved at the results of that meeting like everyone else. But, let's suppose for a moment that this continuing drama is not entirely based on what we see, but instead what might not be so apparent. You see, when oil was first discovered around 2015, the initial profit-sharing agreements were distinctly not in favor of Guyana's economic well-being. Our negotiating team at that time was hopelessly incapable of dealing with those really very powerful oil giants. But more recently, the current government has sought to rewrite those agreements to make them more profitable for Guyana. Could it be that this has caused one or two of those powerful oil companies to move a few pieces around the chessboard of world politics to influence certain recent developments? If such developments were intended to quell the desire of Guyanese to seek a more equitable share of the oil revenue, then I don't think the Guyanese government intends to buckle. And Guyanese people should certainly not be afraid or feel unprotected, but should try to understand the seriousness of this situation and know that we must come together to face it. Now, the intention here is not to create fear or dissent, but to discuss our heritage and our identities as Guyanese and Caribbean people, and to awaken a sense of pride in recognizing that heritage and identity. Therefore, we should realize that the Venezuelan government is always seeking an opportunity to fire up their people with the idea of claiming the Essequibo, and especially now when hundreds of thousands of their citizens are fleeing the country. If we follow the news, we would see that most of the immigrants at the southern border of the US are Venezuelans, and many of these poor people have actually moved to Guyana, where they managed to gain some dignity after decades of suffering in their own country. At one time in the 70s and 80s it was the other way around. So it is not hard to see why Maduro finds it convenient to revamp the bogus claim in order to cover up his failure to make a good life for the people of Venezuela. Guyanese people need to awaken to the fact that any aggressor won't see us as Indo or Afro people. We must therefore reinvent ourselves as Guyanese, or we will be the losers in any kind of conflict. Guyanese were, and continue to be, well educated. We have traveled abroad and made a good living in many different places. We are peace-loving, except at election time, and must continue to believe in ourselves if we are to survive in this ever-changing world with its constantly emerging challenges. In order for us to understand our identity as Guyanese, we need to study our past, and to rediscover our heritage. I am very proud to be known as a Guyanese and by extension, a West Indian. I was born and I grew up in a place called Kitty, which is a part of the capital, Georgetown. Like many other Guyanese and West Indians, I have relatives who are of Indian descent. Our ancestors came from India as indentured servants, and I also have relatives that have African blood in them. Some of my cousins are Chinese. I was baptized in a Lutheran church. My mother was Muslim. My father was a Hindu before being converted to the Christian faith by his elder brother, who was a Lutheran priest, and I got married in a Catholic church. I am a Guyanese. I am as Guyanese as pepper pot and ginger beer at Christmas time, and as Guyanese as a 7 curry with dal and rice served up in a puri leaf at an Indian wedding house. I am a Guyanese and a West Indian and proud of this. But how do some of us see ourselves? As Guyanese, or as Africans? Or Indians? Take a careful look around and observe what is happening around you. There are people who are coming to Guyana who will in time become Guyanese citizens, and they will feel a certain sense of pride when they do. What about us who were born in Guyana? Do we identify as Guyanese? Or do we prefer to be called Indians, Africans, Afro, or Indo-Guyanese? As a good example, let's take a look at the Guyanese president. This man is the embodiment of everything I always imagined a true Guyanese to be. He is educated and road smart at the same time. Nobody pushes him around, and he appears to take nonsense from no one, including Maduro. He impresses me as being cultured, mature and wise for his age, reminds me of both Forbes Burnham and Chedi Jagan, 2 past presidents. This president is well-spoken and confidently addresses crowds of his countrymen and is equally at ease with international heads of state, holding his ground in either circumstance. He is cool and suave without being flamboyant, firm, direct and honest, and I believe he has won the respect of those in his own government, including the opposition, as well as the heads of state in CARICOM and other esteemed bodies. A true Guyanese, I say, a real homeboy. Let's look at this man who is showing good leadership and try to emulate him when we declare ourselves as Guyanese. I'm sure you know of many Guyanese and West Indians who live in other countries, but are they seen as Americans, Canadians or English or anything else, or are they regarded as only second-class citizens in another man's country? Hi, this is Aaron Darcy. Stay with me a while longer as we explore the lighter side of Guyana's history and its cultures. More than one, for we are from many different roots working towards one Guyana and I dare say, one Caribbean nation. Thank you again for joining me on this journey to talk about being Guyanese and Caribbean. Let's take a look at another side of our heritage. Burt Bacharach, as you know, was a musician who passed away a few years ago at the age of 94. He composed hundreds of pop songs beginning in the late 1950s up until the 70s. He is remembered for much of the great music we used to listen to on the radio back in the 60s and 70s, and, oh, I mean those of us who are over 60. And who could forget the emotions that most of us felt when Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, and we mourn whenever a great star falls, the point being that we in Guyana, and the wider Caribbean, were and still are greatly influenced by music on the radio, from Bacharach and MJ, to Sparrow, Byron Lee and Taylor Swift. The singers and their songs were, and remain, a great part of our social fabric. These days of course it's from YouTube, Spotify, Amazon and a million other sources that we get our music, and that is good. But back then, and I mean, the 60s and 70s, listening to radio, reading books, and going to the cinema, were the main forms of entertainment alongside games like cricket and football. There were no TVs back then in Guyana, but we listened to cricket commentary on the radio. I did not see a real TV set until about 1980, before which I only saw them in movies. And I did not own one until 1987, strange or amusing, as that might seem in today's world. But we soaked up a wide range of English and American music and movies, as well as Hindi songs from Indian movies. There were radio programs dedicated to music as well as those that entertained us with other very interesting topics. I remember back in the 70s listening to the legendary Ron Robinson on Radio Demerara's Good Morning Guyana and to Matthew Allen on GBC, our two local radio stations. Each of them played their own choice in music while we got ready for school or work. And then there was Pancho Carew at 1 o'clock in the afternoon entertaining us through those long sleepy after lunch hours and responding to requests for particular songs on his show, Best by Request. Monday evenings at 8:30, Ayub Hamid did his thing with the Indian Memory album, and on Sunday afternoons after 1 o'clock until about 4, there were a few programs featuring Indian music and local people performing Indian music. Here on these radio programs was where many of us learned to appreciate music in general and especially from Indian movies. African music I recall being produced and performed by the Guyanese group, the Yoruba Singers, and I met people in Buxton and other villages who played African drums. There were a few really great steel bands in Guyana, like the Dem Toko Steel Orchestra and one of the more popular bands, the Chronicle Atlantic Symphony Steel Orchestra, which performed to large audiences not only in Guyana, but in the Caribbean and in the USA as well. And we, all of us, celebrate the Christian festivals of Christmas and Easter, Hindu festivals like Pagwa and Diwali, and Muslim Eid al-Adha and Eid Mubarak. So we are very privileged to have grown up in such a great big melting pot of cultures. This is a huge part of our identities as Guyanese and West Indians. In this mixture of races and cultures we can find strength and decency. In finding respect for ourselves and for each other we can find many reasons for calling ourselves Guyanese and West Indians and feeling proud about this. We ought to take some time and reflect on these things and determine to reinvent ourselves each day. Remember, we are a strong, happy and beautiful group of people, but we must also face reality and educate ourselves about the real challenges that face us each new day. And remember, to fail to prepare is to prepare to fail, for whatever we may have to face. In our next episode we will travel back in time to 1969 and look at an attempted insurrection in Guyana. Thank you for listening. I look forward to you joining on the next episode of Forgotten Stories from Guyana and the Caribbean with Aaron Darcy. Join me then as we travel through time and revisit our history to discover what it means to be Guyanese and Caribbean people. Goodbye.